Please welcome to City Church, Governor Ron DeSantis.
Good evening. Yeah, we went to Dublin to watch Florida State lose to Georgia Tech. Then we went to Florida State and lost to Boston College. So I figured if I go to the Jags-Dolphins game, at least the Florida team is going to win, and that's what happened.
Well, if they lose a non-Florida game next week, we're going to ask you all to stay home.
Yes.
Thanks for being here with us tonight. It means a lot to have you here at City Church, this event. Obviously, a very important season in the life of our state and the life of our culture. And before we even get started, I just want to say on behalf of our church family, thank you for your leadership and how you're leading our state. So we're very grateful for it.
Well, City Church has been involved in that. The First Lady's Hope Florida program has really aimed to harness all the great energy and resources that are outside of government to help people in need, particularly our faith community. And City Church is the #1 participant for Hope Florida in all of Tallahassee. So you've been able to help a lot of people. It's really meaningful, and we really believe, bureaucracy issuing a check is not going to fundamentally change somebody's life. And when people are in need, they need more than just what government can provide. So the Hope Florida has basically linked people in need to people that care, like here at City Church. So you guys have done a great job. And Dean adopted one of our rescue dogs that we were helping get rescued here. Hopefully that's working out well. We used to do that back when we were living in Ponte Vedra Beach. My wife would go to the animal shelter in Northeast Florida and find the ones that, the days were limited because it was a kill shelter. So she would bring them home, and she had her TV show then, so she'd bring them on the TV show and adopt them out. And so we cycled in a lot of dogs and even in cats too. And in every instance but one, people would report back to us, "Oh, we love the dog. We love everything so good." There was one dog though. Look, it wasn't the dog's fault. It was actually in the psych ward, and there was all this problem. And someone did adopt it, and we just never heard anything about how that worked out. So hopefully you're doing well.
As long as they're not cat ladies, right? Sorry, don't comment on that. So the first thing I want to ask you here in our church setting is just the question of how has your faith impacted your politics and political career?
Well, I think a lot of it is when you're, as a leader, you have to be somebody that's going to be willing to cut against the grain. You've got to be somebody that's not just going to put your finger in the wind. Because if that's all it is, what difference does it make who you elect, right? They just try to figure that out. And so, you got to have the courage of your convictions. And I think that an ability to do that requires a solid foundation. Okay, so what do you believe? What's your worldview? And if that's anchored in faith in God, belief in America's founding principles, that really is a guide that can set you in a direction to be able to lead, and it provides you. I tell people, they ask me, what is it like to be governor? What advice would you give people that want to be in your shoes or something else? And I cite, first, put on the full armor of God. When you do that, you're able to weather these storms. And so I think it's a foundational matter. I don't think it's something that I can say, okay, what should the sales tax be or this or that? It's not something that you can necessarily just get, but I think it's part of kind of who you are, how you see the world, and your foundational values with which you approach the problems in front of you.
And one thing that can unite Christians across denominational lines is we believe that all people are made in the image of God. That's a foundational Christian belief. So we also therefore believe in the sanctity of human life. You and the First Lady have been outspoken about the issue of life really throughout your political career. And from a personal standpoint, why has this issue been so important to you?
Well, if you go back to how our founders founded this country, they wrote a Declaration of Independence that said we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, beginning with the right to life. And so that was the insight that America was founded upon. that we're not just randomly scattered protoplasm that just here, but that there's actually a plan and a higher power. And so I think that flows right from the foundations of this country. I also think, as a matter of science, it's something that you can't indulge in the science on this and not have a respect for the sanctity of life. I mean, I remember I was pro-life anyways, but when we had our first child, being in there very early when my wife was pregnant, hearing the heartbeat of the child, seeing the sonograms, doing all of that, it has an impact on you as you go. So, but I think we've also taken, and Hope Florida as an example, what we've done with helping with more foster parents, adoption, what we've done to promote fatherhood. We've recognized that creating a culture of life doesn't just stop when you have a nice, healthy baby born. As great as that is, you need to be able to have people succeed. And so, for example, we abolished all sales tax on baby items in Florida. No sales tax on diapers, wipes, cribs, strollers. Anything you need to raise a baby is now tax-free in the state of Florida. And think about how much you spend on diapers to raise, especially if you have multiple kids, and all these other things. And I think it flows from that belief in how precious human life is.
No, I appreciate that. And as a father of an 18-month-old, thank you for making that a reality.
Well, the thing was, when I became governor, we didn't have inflation in 2019. And so we did a lot of good stuff. We did a lot of good tax cuts. We did a lot of all kind of good stuff. Education, school choice, all this stuff. And but then when the inflation started happening, 2021, 22-ish, we're like, how can we provide relief? And so this baby items thing was kind of a big deal. So we did it in 22 for a year, and then in the spring of 23, we made it permanent. So permanent elimination of sales tax on all baby items. And so this is about a year and a half ago. Our youngest was, I guess, had just turned. It was probably 3.5. And it was out of diapers, and I came home and I told the First Lady, I'm like, isn't this great? We now have permanent exclusion of sales tax on all baby items. Just think about all people are going to save on diapers and all this stuff. And she just looked at me and said, why didn't you do that your first year as governor when our kids were in diapers?
Well, thank you for being pro all of life. And that really does fly against the narrative that's on the radical left, that we only care about babies till they're born. So I appreciate you modeling that and showing that what it looks like to be pro all of life, which you definitely have done that as governor. So Amendment 4 is on the ballot. And a lot of us are very concerned about this. I'm driving around Tallahassee, and I see vote yes for Amendment 4, throughout different homes across the community. And I would just like for you to explain to us exactly why this is such a radical amendment. And I wonder, as I'm driving around, do these folks even really know what they're voting for? Do they know what's at stake? Can you just give us a brief education on Amendment 4?
Well, okay, so there's a couple things. One is whatever you think abortion policy should be, you have a legislature, you have elected officials. This is putting something in the Constitution forever. It will never be changed if this passes. Technically, you could do another constitutional amendment, but the chance of that is 1 in a million. And so this is really an inappropriate use of this mechanism when you figure out what is actually in this. So just as a constitutional matter, I think it's an easy no vote on 4. I'm also going to talk about Amendment 3 before I'm out here about the corporate weed. We'll talk about that too. But this, so that's a structural constitutional reason to vote no, apart from whether you're pro-life or not. The other thing is if you look at how we do constitutional amendments in Florida, the legislature can put amendments on the ballot. We have every 20 years a constitutional revision commission that can put amendments on the ballot. And then you have what's called a citizen initiative, which anyone can do. You get signatures. If you get a certain amount, it goes to the Florida Supreme Court, and you draft a ballot summary of the amendment. So you don't actually, as the voter, see the text of the amendment that's going to go on our Constitution. And 99% of voters will never read the actual text that is going on the Constitution. So that summary is really critical, because that's effectively the only thing that 90+% of voters will ever see. Even if they do research, they're likely not to read the actual text. And so when you're proposing these, they're basically all by well-funded interests. So Amendment 4 is bankrolled by all the organs of the left: George Soros, ACLU, the abortion industry, all that stuff. Amendment 3 is bankrolled by one marijuana company that's put in $80 million, and I'll tell you why they've done that. So they do this, and they get to write the summary. So their whole reason, the whole goal of writing the summary is to write it as misleading and deceptive as possible to get as many, because you need 60% to get people to vote. Because you'll never get 60% if they were honest about what's in this, because it's really a crazy thing to put in a constitution. Now, the Florida Supreme Court is supposed to review the language, and if it's misleading or deceptive, they're not supposed to let it on the ballot, because that summary is all the voter sees. They're not seeing the text. It's one thing if you just put the text on there, then the voter can read it. But this is not what's actually going to go in the Constitution. So it is important that they're not playing any games with this, and they're fully informing the voters what they're voting for. Florida Supreme Court, in a really bad decision, split 4-3 to put it on the ballot. So we now have this amendment, Amendment 4, where it's not what it appears to be. If you read it, it kind of seems innocuous. They don't define any of the terms that they're using. They use loopholes to try to convince you that they may be doing something in one way when they're really doing it the other way. And so just from a self-government perspective, this is not the way to do business. This is a bait and switch. They're trying to get people who are pro-life to think that this is somehow a pro-life amendment, and they're trying to get people who may not be pro-life but do not want the extreme left agenda to think that this is somehow sanitary. So what does it do? Effectively, it greenlights abortion till the moment of birth. Now, what they'll say is, you can have abortion without question until, quote, viability, but they don't define viability. Now, I think the left would view that as you could have a 6 months, fully formed, capable of feeling pain, that could literally be dismembered in a dismemberment abortion, and they would say that should be constitutionally mandated in our Constitution to be a practice that must go on in Florida. And that's bad. Don't get me, I think a majority of Floridians do not think that that's acceptable, right? But what's even worse is they say, but any healthcare provider who says that abortion for health reasons can be done at any time. Now, that green lights the loophole to go to all 9 months, and people say, oh, it's rare to do late term. That's true, but most late term abortions in this country are in fact elective. They are not for these extenuating circumstances that you hear about a lot in the media. Most still are elective. Why? Financial reasons. There's pressure from the father. The industry makes money. There's a lot of reasons why that's the case. So that's what would happen in Florida. I don't think very many people want to see that. I think they think that that's way too extreme. But one of the things that's really problematic about this is this use of the term healthcare provider instead of physician. So any health, and here's the thing, when it's in the Constitution, you can't legislate against that. So they're saying anyone who says they're a healthcare provider, well, who's a healthcare? A massage therapist is a healthcare provider. A clerk at Planned Parenthood is a healthcare provider. A chiropractor is a health. You do not need to be a physician. That's going to be in the Constitution of the state of Florida. That's going to create a cottage industry of some very unscrupulous practices. It's going to be almost impossible to provide any health and safety regulations for that. What it also does is it eliminates parental consent for minors in the state of Florida. They do it with a bait and switch. They say at the end of the summary, nothing in this amendment shall be interpreted to deny the right of a parent to receive notification of a minor's abortion. That is not consent. And if you read that language against the overall gist of the amendment saying there can be nothing to delay, impede, or obstruct somebody getting an abortion, I think even the notification is basically a red herring. I don't think you can do functional notification because it would end up potentially delaying, and they say you can't delay. So that would just be a fig leaf. We have parental consent for minors in Florida. So this severs the right of the parent to be able to consent to their child's procedure, and it would be the only thing in Florida that a parent does not have the right to consent to. And that's going to be permanent in our Constitution forever. The other thing it likely will cause is it will likely require taxpayer funding of all these abortions. Why? Well, the ACLU ran this amendment in Michigan. People said it may lead to taxpayer funding. They said, oh, no, no, no. The amendment passed, and then the ACLU went to court to sue to say taxpayers must fund all these abortions. So that will happen if this passes. Obviously, how the courts determine that, I don't know, but I would not put my faith in judges to necessarily do the right thing. So that's something that very well may happen. Now, if you're pro-life, there is no possible justification to vote yes on this. If you're pro-life, you have to vote no. That's just very clear. And everybody who's pro-life just needs to know that in this state. A lot of people don't even know this amendment is pending. A lot of pastors around the state haven't heard much about it. And so that's going to change in the ensuing weeks. But if you're pro-life, that's the case. Even if you're not pro-life, unless you're very, very extreme, you should not want this put into the Constitution. The people that used to be on the other side of pro-life, they used to say they wanted abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. Well, understand what this amendment would do. When you're substituting health care providers for doctors, that is not safe. You are going to have really bad practices that develop for people that don't have the proper medical training. They're going to take advantage of vulnerable women for profit because they will make money off it. That will absolutely harm people, and you can't legislate around it. You can't say it only can be doctors because the Constitution would trump that. So it's not going to be safe. And what about rare? Well, if you look in this region, from Texas to South Carolina, generally speaking, the laws in those states are pro-life in varying degrees, but certainly the most pro-life region of the United States. So if this passes, not only will abortion not be rare, Florida will be the tourist destination for the entire southeast region of the United States. So you will see a massive increase in the number of abortions that are occurring inside the state of Florida. So not only will it not be rare, we will reach record numbers here in the state of Florida. So I think if you're somebody that may not be pro-life, but you also understand that, we don't want to say that this should just be done without any regard for the unborn, that there has to be some limits, there has to be safety regulations, then you should vote no on this too. Do not put this in the Constitution. We're not going to be able to unring the bell if this goes in to Florida's Constitution. So I think it's a crazy amendment. I think they did a really good job of fashioning language that's very vague, very deceptive to try to get people to do. Now, this is just the world we live in. The media will be 100% shilling to vote yes. That's 100% the case. And so it really requires the people to fight back against what's going to be a lot of misinformation, a lot of propaganda, and just tell people the truth. So you guys will know this, but I would just encourage people, go on, read the actual text of this amendment. Now, interestingly, when we do these amendments, there's an impact statement that goes along with it. So the impact statement that was approved by the Florida Supreme Court, the left sued to try to get this impact statement off the ballot. When you go in and read the summary, which is very opaque, very vague, very misleading, next to it will be an impact statement about what does this abortion amendment actually do. And what the impact statement is going to say is the amendment will lead to a substantial increase in the number of abortions and a substantial reduction in live births in the state of Florida. They said those numbers could go even further if parental consent is overridden and if taxpayers are on the hook for funding abortions. It also says that we're likely to see less economic growth as a result of this policy, will likely cause the state government to have to expend more resources, and will ultimately potentially be negative for the economy. So people are going to see that. They're going to see parental rights. They're going to see taxpayer funding. they're going to see massive increase in the numbers of abortions. And so that provides some clarity when a voter sees that. And again, that's not a partisan organization providing that information. That is going to be on the ballot that you actually read. So I think that's a positive aspect of this, that you're going to be able to see that.
So from local churches like ours, what would you like to see from churches to help defeat this amendment in our state?
Well, I think you got to spread the word. You got to spread the word to vote no on 4. First of all, we can have a debate on right to life. We can have a debate on abortion policy. But the proper place to do that is who you elect to serve you in the legislature and to make policy. Why would you put something in the Constitution? Just on the healthcare provider alone, to put that in the Constitution and basically say it doesn't have to be a physician, that runs counter to everything that people that were pro-abortion have said for decades. That alone, taking away parental consent, that alone should be a deal breaker. And again, if this were a piece of legislation in front of the legislature, obviously I would not be supportive of it. But if something like that were to pass, you would be able to go in the next election and elect people that would restore parental rights, or that would restore the safety and the physicians and protections. And so I think you just got to be vocal. You got to inform people about what's at stake here. But it would absolutely be something that people would regret if this ends up getting enacted.
So we also have Amendment 3 on the ballot, which you called corporate weed earlier. And just selfishly, I don't want to smell it walking around all the time. Is that what's going to happen if this amendment goes forward?
Oh, without question. There'll be rampant public use if this passes. But just take a step back. So first principles, whatever you think about weed, is it a constitutional issue or is it a normal policy issue? If it's a normal policy issue, you should vote no and let it be dealt with in the normal political process. If you want to elect pro-weed candidates, then you can do that. And you have every freedom to do that. But to put it in the Constitution, they literally, if this passes in the state of Florida, you will have a constitutional right to possess and smoke up to 40 or 50 joints of marijuana. You don't have a constitutional right to drink water. You don't have a specific constitutional right to eat a cheeseburger. You don't have a constitutional right to chew tobacco. I mean, like, why would you make this one thing of anything? You don't have a constitutional right, to drink a beer. So it's just odd that this would be something that you would elevate to a constitutional level. So that's the first thing. Second thing, okay, why is this being done? Now, people say, oh, I just think it's wrong if somebody, smokes marijuana and they end up serving, like a prison sentence. First of all, the number of people in Florida State Prison simply for using marijuana, I know the number precisely, 0. There's 0 people in jail simply for using marijuana. There's a handful in jail for some relatively low-level marijuana offenses, but every one of them were convicted of other offenses. And so if you have somebody that's committing, manslaughter, vehicular manslaughter, and they happen to have marijuana on them, well, you could see how that could get tacked on, right? So the reality of people going to prison for smoking marijuana, look, it's not my cup of tea. I don't think it's good. I don't think people should do it. But I also, we're not sending law enforcement to people's homes to worry about what they're doing with respect to marijuana. And people smoke it medically in Florida, which is legal, and we've implemented that when the voters passed it. And I know they do it recreationally, but because it's not wide open, you don't see it in public the way you see it in some of these other places. So the reality is, if that's something you're concerned about, that is not the case. That is not happening. I've pardoned people for past marijuana offenses. And if you want the legislature to make clear, hey, even though no one's in prison for just smoking marijuana, we will not authorize that. You could do. But that's kind of the premise that gets put out there behind this, and that is not a reason to amend the Constitution of Florida. Why is this amendment coming? It's coming because one weed company, True Leaf, who basically has a de facto monopoly over medical weed in Florida. You see they have stores here in Tallahassee. They're traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange. They have now poured, I think, $80 million into getting this on the ballot and passing it. the weed amendment was written by the CEO of TrueLeaf. She wrote it. She wrote the ballot summary. This should have never been approved by the Florida Supreme Court either, because it is a misleading summary. It doesn't fully inform the voter of the impact of the amendment, and a variety of reasons there. But you just have to ask yourself, why would a marijuana company spend, they're going to probably end up spending $100 million. Why would they spend $100 million? Are they doing that just because they care about your rights? No, they're doing it because they wrote the amendment to give themselves effective monopoly over the weed market in Florida. They're creating in Florida's constitution a weed cartel, which they're the biggest company, so they would end up being probably a complete monopoly if this were to pass. And they know that they will be able to make a fortune here in the state of Florida. So it's an example of amending the Constitution on an issue that shouldn't be in the Constitution to begin with, but then actually bending the state's Constitution, our fundamental law, to guarantee themselves profits. And not only do they create this weed cartel, they have no civil liability for anything that they do involving the cultivation, production, and sale of marijuana. So if they sell you bogus marijuana and you have seizures, you can't sue them. They are immune from civil liability. If they are, with this language, which will be, again, this is not in the ballot summary. You have to read the actual text of the amendment that they're proposing. It has total immunity, civil immunity. Anything involving the weed operation. So if they are transporting marijuana to one of their stores and they run over a little kid, they are going to claim that they are immune from civil liability. I guarantee you, because it's in the Constitution. It says there's no qualifications on the civil immunity. So this is horrendous public policy. Even if you like weed, you should not want to create a constitutional cartel to benefit one weed company. It's ridiculous. Now, what about public use? If this passes, the Florida Constitution will say that the legislature can regulate medical marijuana for use in public. There is no authority provided in this amendment or in current Constitution to regulate recreational marijuana. So a lot of very smart people in the Florida legislature have said, we're not going to be able to restrict its use in public. It will violate the Constitution. And TrueLeaf could have said that of course you can regulate it in public and keep it out of public spaces. Now, here's the thing, and I think the legislators are probably right on that. If you read, it will say medical can be regulated. It doesn't say recreational. But I think it's almost irrelevant. Colorado has very strong prohibitions against public use of marijuana. Have any of you been to Denver in the last decade? What does it smell like? Where do you see? All across they're using weed. And I think that that's instructive, because even if it said specifically in the amendment that the legislature could limit or prohibit the use of marijuana in public, functionally, I don't think you would be able to do it. Why? They're making it a constitutional right. Is law enforcement going to want to mess with marijuana if it's a constitutional right? No. So, and we've had to talk to people in the business community and our tourism industry, because they're like, well, you know, it's like my private location, I can do what I want. Well, you know, if someone comes in your restaurant or bar and they're smoking marijuana, and they won't leave, and you call the sheriff's department, is the sheriff going to send a deputy for marijuana? No, not if this amendment passes. They're going to say, we're not dealing with marijuana. They will not deal with it. And I think that that would be a reasonable response from law enforcement given what would be in the Constitution. So the public use of this will be rampant. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's what will happen. So again, if you don't like marijuana, you should be no on this. Even if you like marijuana, you should acknowledge it's not appropriate for a constitution and vote no on that ground. Even if that's something that doesn't concern you, you should acknowledge that it's wrong for one weed company to basically vest itself with special constitutional protections for a monopoly and against civil liability, and vote no. And it's interesting, the media will say, Amendment 3 is about marijuana legalization. That's actually not fully accurate. It's about partial legalization of marijuana. Because what they're saying is you will have a right to smoke and possess a certain amount of weed, but only if you buy it from them. You want to grow some plants in your backyard? They can still put you in jail for doing that. And so I think most people who are pro-marijuana, they would say, well, if you're legalizing it, then obviously I would be able to just like grow a plant on my back. No, you can't. This is a corporate weed cartel. So I think that people who like marijuana should still vote no on this, because this is one company that's using our Constitution to try to benefit themselves. And I mean, is there anybody who thinks that any business would spend 80, 90, $100 million just because they want to benefit humanity? No, they're doing it for themselves. So I think it's an easy thing to vote no on. I do think it'll have implications for quality of life in Florida if it passes. I think it'll have implications for tourism. And I think it's going to be something that, say it passes, say 2 years later, everyone's like, this is a mistake, you're not going to be able to unring the bell. The legislature's not going to be able to go in and tweak it and fix it. It's going to be in the Constitution forever. And so it should not, the correct thing is to vote no on it.
So how do these amendments just get past us and get on the ballot? Like, how do we prevent these things? It's almost like it's like a bully kind of effort and
well,
deception.
I mean, so when Florida's current constitution was created in the 60s, the idea was the citizen initiative would be like, okay, if the government isn't functioning properly, the people, it would almost be like the committees of correspondence in like the Revolutionary War time. You'd have a bunch of like PTA moms circulating petitions. People would sign. They'd come up with something to fix the problems, and it was viewed as kind of a grassroots tool for ordinary people to band together, put something on the ballot, and change the Constitution. Now, the original requirement was that only 50% of voters had to ratify it, which is insane, because a constitutional amendment should not be one blip in time if public opinion is 50. You should require a higher threshold. So that has since been raised to 60%, which is reflective. Our founders believed you need 2/3 of Congress to propose a constitutional amendment, or you need 3/4 of the states, 3/5 of the states to propose. And so 3/4 of states to ratify. So it's just, but that was how it was done. What's happened over the years is it's basically been hijacked by entrenched interests. They will spend millions and millions of dollars. They pay these petition gatherers. They bring them in from out of state. The whole thing is very seedy. I mean, like some of these petitions, like they're dead people that are supposedly submitting petitions, and like they've uncovered some of this. They're looking into that now on some of these amendments. So there's a lot of things that are really seedy about it, but ultimately, this is not something that is just being done organically by grassroots. This is something that is being done by very entrenched interests. I mean, True Leaf is going to make a lot of money if this passes. The abortion industry is going to make a huge amount of money if this passes, Amendment 4 passes. And so that's what it is. Now, when these were being proposed, so you have to, you have to have the summary and the text and all that. So that's been out there for a while. And we looked at it in 23 and at the beginning of 24, and we're like, court is never going to put these amendments on the ballot. I mean, the abortion Amendment 4 is like so deceptive, so misleading. There were 6 different ways they could have said that does not meet the constitutional requirements to be on the ballot. And think about it. If you're going to have voters ratify, shouldn't we all agree on what we're actually voting on? I mean, how is it that you can't define anything and nobody knows what any of these terms mean? If you wanted to propose an amendment that said, 3/4 of the legislature shall be required to override the governor's veto, whether that's a good idea or not, everyone would know what that would mean. 100% of voters would know. You can vote up, you can vote down. This, by the court not doing its job, we're now in a situation where you have very vague, misleading language, no definitions, and we're supposed to somehow do this. The marijuana one, too, I mean, it's very misleading on how they do. It says that if they pass the amendment will, quote, allow there to be a weed cartel. No, it mandates that there's a weed cartel. It's not just allowing it. I mean, it's already allowed now. If you wanted to set up a weed cartel, you probably could with legislation. It's mandating it. And one of the justices who dissented point that out. The other thing is, the summary does not acknowledge at all the fact that these big weed companies are giving themselves total immunity from civil liability. That is a huge thing. I don't think that's ever been done in the history of the state of Florida. It may not have been done in any state constitution in the United States, as far as I can tell. And it is a massive grant of civil immunity that's going to allow them to operate with impunity, and they're going to be able to harm people and get away with it. So neither of them should have been on. We honestly thought, there's no way the court will approve the marijuana, and they split 4-3. And then the abortion one, and then the marijuana one, they split 5-2 to put it on. So it is what it is, and so you got to deal with it. But just understand, this is something that is being pushed by very well-moneyed, entrenched interests.
Back to the issue of life, are you surprised at how radical the left has gotten on this issue? You mentioned the old safe, legal, and rare, and now they've even gone after pregnancy centers, trying to shut those down. It seemed like we had so much momentum after Roe v. Wade was overturned, and now I feel like it almost feels at times like we're losing the culture war in this moment on this. I know I asked a couple questions in one sentence there, but are you surprised by this? Do you agree that we're
there's been a massive shift on the left. I mean, they used to say, abortion should be discouraged. We want it to be rare. But what they would say is, ultimately, they didn't want to provide legal protections for unborn life. They wanted to just simply leave it up to the mother to consult with the doctor. And that was kind of the mantra. Well, now look where we are. They're not only not saying it should be rare, they want more to happen. They celebrate when there's an increase in abortion. And the doctor and the mother making decision, in Florida, they're trying to cut the doctor out to say it could be any healthcare provider, quote unquote. Now, they don't define that, but I think what you're going to have is anyone that could conceivably be a healthcare provider. If they can make money off this, they are. If the government, if the legislature tries to stop it, they're going to sue and cite the constitutional text, and they're probably going to win. And so that's where we are. So it's been a huge shift on this, and I don't know exactly what's motivating it, because if you think about having this debate in like in the 70s, we didn't have access to sonograms. We didn't have access to a lot of the technology that we have now, and all the technology has really bolstered the case for protecting human life. And yet, as that has happened, it's almost like, they don't want to acknowledge any of that, and they're just going headstrong. And so I think that it's been, and look, part of the issue is there are voters who, when they're told that this would allow abortion till birth, they don't like that, they don't support that, but they were like, well, we don't think that ever happens. And it does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. But if it only happened once in this country, to take somebody 8 months in for just an elective purpose, no extenuating circumstance, how would that be acceptable? It's just wrong. Now, I also think that because, the political winds, when Dobbs came down, there was you have a lot of these pro-life groups that are based out of D.C. I have not seen them help us against Amendment 4 at all. Now, maybe I'll be surprised, but I have not seen any of that. And it's almost like, what makes them more relevant and gives them access to power is more important than standing up for what's right sometimes. And I think you've seen a lack of courage, particularly amongst D.C. politicians. And I spoke at the Republican Party annual dinner last night down in South Florida, and we have 22 elected members of our federal delegation, 2 senators and 20 congressmen. And I read a list of the congressmen who have agreed to not only oppose Amendment 4, but to contribute financially from their political committees to the effort to educate voters about what it means. And then there was a smaller subset of those elected officials who have publicly came out against Amendment 4, have not agreed yet, and I think they probably will, to support the effort that's being undertaken in Florida. But then there's a handful of omissions of people that have not even said, not even put out a tweet saying Amendment 4 is bad for Florida. I urge, Floridians to vote no. Sometimes they're asked and they'll say, oh, it's a state issue. Now, and these are people that really, when it was convenient, would say how pro-life they were and would talk about it being a fundamental issue. And that was when their ambitions, I guess, were coinciding with getting office. Because if you run saying you're weak on life, you probably aren't going to win a Republican primary, right? And so now it's just different. And that just bugs me. If you run for office saying, you're more of a squishy Republican, you don't want to take, strong stands on a variety of issues, like, look, I may disagree with that, but at least you're being honest, right? When you run saying, you're for life, you're for all these issues, and then when it comes time to actually do something about it, you're nowhere to be found, that is not what courageous leadership is all about. But there's way too much of that in our country right now, and I do think, since the Dobbs decision, you've had a lot of people who talked big when it was easy to do, but when there's a little heat, when you get a little bit of heat in the kitchen, when the Klieg lights get on you, when people start throwing arrows at you, well, then they're not so comfortable, and they would rather just kind of, bury into a little cubby hole and just pretend like nothing's happening around them. And I could have done that, honestly, with Amendment 4. I could have just said, you know what, it's on the ballot, people can decide, let the chips fall where they may, but that's not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to stand up for what's right and take a stand.
Thank you. Couple more questions. I want to speak to our political climate right now. Obviously, we're not the first Christians in the history of the world to live in a hostile times towards the faith, but maybe it's kind of crept up on us pretty quickly, just how much hostility there is towards Christianity, especially conservative Christianity. We have a lot of college students sitting here on the front row who are part of our church family. How would you encourage the people in this room to navigate these waters right now, where it's just, for lack of a better way to put it, wokeness everywhere, hostility? How would you encourage this group to navigate through these days?
Well, one, I think all those observations are correct, but I also think that that's not unusual at all if you look at history. If you're familiar with the history of the church, that is really to be expected. And so I think you've got to you've got to be willing to stand up when it's not easy. I'll have people come up to me, my son or daughter's in college or this, and if they speak with their mind, they feel this and all this other stuff. And when I say is, courage is contagious. When people are standing up for what's right, when you see that this is happening, people take some incoming, but they stand their ground, it really encourages more people to stand up and take a stand and do what's right. And it's a whole variety of issues. Now, I will say, whatever currents there are nationally, we obviously have a federal government that has attacked pro-lifers, even put them in prison for things that they would never have imprisoned anybody on the left for. It's been an abuse of power, there's no question. But in the state of Florida, we fought back on all that. If you look at what we've done, look at our universal school choice program. Most people who are using those scholarships are going to religious schools. Most people who are choosing a better path are choosing, probably a majority of them are various denominations of Christian schools. If you look at Hope Florida, the big insight in Hope Florida was, yes, government can't do it all. We have to harness these resources. Let's get government and use government as a tool to link people to all the resources in the community. But the biggest source of help was the faith community, and we were the first administration to bring the faith community in and say, you're a partner in making the state of Florida a better place. You're a partner with us to be able to help people and to lift them up, particularly people who are in need. And so we've really done that very proudly. We've done that to really positive effect. You just look at Hope Florida. They've gotten over 30,000 people. Just on the Department of Children and Families component, they've gotten over 30,000 people either partially or completely off all public assistance. That's something that's remarkable. These are people that are on a pathway to self-sufficiency, and so the churches have really responded. So we've looked to harness that. We think that that's a good thing. Things like, I signed the bill to mandate a moment of silence in schools. Like here, obviously in Christian schools, not going to be a big deal because it's already done. But in public schools, decades ago, they took prayer out of school, took the Bible out of school. Well, shouldn't we have a time where students can pray in the morning and contemplate and have that, say the Pledge of Allegiance, start their day? We think that is. Now, a lot of school districts have had that, but not all of them did, so we did. So I think we've really done well. And it's not, look, as much as we would look at Christian, and I think we are, the top state for religious freedom for Christians, but we're also the top state for religious freedom for Jews. And if you look at how Jews are being persecuted in different states on college campuses, look what's happened since I've been governor. We've had a massive influx of Orthodox Jews into the state of Florida. And honestly, I mean, it's like, the right thing to do, but politically it's been good. When COVID hit and we saw all these New York license plates coming down, particularly to southern Florida, a lot of my supporters like, oh my gosh, just what we need. All these New Yorkers are going to vote liberal, all this stuff. And people look at Florida now and it's like, oh, the governor won by 20 points, but in the past, it was like razor-thin elections, right? So if you're importing 30,000 liberal New Yorkers, that could potentially tip a statewide election. And what I told them is, listen, I can't speak for any New Yorker coming down, all New Yorkers coming down, but if they're wearing that yarmulke and they're Orthodox, they're with us politically. So you should
come on down.
You should want that. But seriously, University of Florida, most Jewish students of any university in the United States. And when Hamas tried to take over our campuses, that did not last but 5 minutes. They were put in their place very quickly. And so, when you see what's happened, and this has been something that was happening in Florida positively, my whole tenure as governor, but even before October 7th, but now since October 7th, it's like we're now, we've had Jewish students transfer into our universities. I waived some of the requirements so they could hotline in. And it wasn't just for Jewish students. I mean, if Christian was being persecuted, they could come too. But we know in those schools, that's where the venom is. And so we did that. And so I think it's good. So I think we've really set a good example of being a great place, a great refuge for religious liberty. And you know what? This is who we are. I mean, the whole society in America traces back to that Judeo-Christian tradition. And so I think it's appropriate that we're doing it.
That's great. So another question I have is, that I think everyone here would probably like to hear, for the DeSantis family, why politics? Why was that the path?
Momentary lapse in judgment. It was not. It was interesting because, like, if you thought, like, people will ask my wife, and she's like, I was she's like, he was just a guy who looked good in a Navy uniform back in the day. She's like, we were just kind of young, we were having fun, and we didn't necessarily know what lied in store. And so we kind of stumbled into it, running as a U.S. congressman in 2012, getting elected in 12 and 14, and then again in 16, and I got elected governor in 2018. And I think one of the things about that experience was, so in Washington, we were living in Ponte Vedra Beach. I'd fly up Monday afternoon. You do votes Monday. You're there all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday, votes Thursday morning, and then you're home. So I'd be home Thursday, mid-afternoon. And that wasn't even every week. That was like maybe 2 of every 3 weeks that you would do that. So it was about 9 nights a month that I would be, and I just slept on the couch in my office. I mean, I didn't have any money to get a place. I didn't want to be in Washington, right? As soon as we were not in session, I'd get out. And so you kind of do that, and it was an adjustment, not the greatest thing in the world, but when we had our first kid, so we had our daughter Madison at the end of my second term, and so I'm going back for the third term. And I remember, she was born November 22nd, 2016. I was sworn in for the third term, January 3rd, 2017. And we drove from Ponte Vedra Beach to D.C. with her in tow. She would sleep in the car, which was great. But then when it came time to go to the hotel to sleep, she was up all night, and she had a great time doing that. But, we brought her on the house floor. When I got sworn in, she was there with me for that. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, it's only 9 nights a month, but it's like, why am I FaceTiming? Like, I really should be back home. And so part of the reason I ran for governor was like, look, I think I can make a difference. Clearly, Congress is like banging your head against the wall. Being governor, you can be a leader, set the agenda, accomplish things, and we've obviously accomplished a lot, and we're proud of that. But you know, I can go do a press conference in Naples, then Jacksonville, and I can be home for dinner. And so that really makes it much better. So we're, you know, we're happy with this type of public service. I don't know, having 3 kids, that it would be sustainable for me to be like if I were still in Congress, would I want to be going up and back to really accomplish nothing? I don't think that would appeal to me. So the reason why we ran for governor, the reason why we stuck with it here, is because you can make things happen. If you see something that you think needs to be done to better the state, better the people, help the people, you can set it on the agenda and you can deliver. And so we've done that on so many different issues that's really what it's all about. But for me, I mean, I don't care about like getting publicity. I don't care. I mean, you know, if I wanted to just do interviews on Fox News every day, like I could do that, right? It's just not, for me, it's all about the results that you're delivering. And everything we do is designed to actually bring it home and produce big results.
Yeah, and interviews at City Church are more fun than interviews at Fox News, right? So there you go. One thing I would like to see happen in your last couple of years as governor of Florida is to make opening day of Major League Baseball season a state holiday, where schools are closed. So I'd appreciate if that happened. You played baseball at Yale. A lot of folks might not know that.
So it's interesting. When I was, I played all the way through college. My Little League team in 1991 made it to the Little League World Series in Williamsport. We finished 6th in the world. This year in Williamsport, last month, a team from Lake Mary, Florida, won the Little League World Championship, the first Florida team to ever do that. And we are going to be honoring them. We're going to do a reception at the governor's mansion on Friday, and then we're going to bring them to the Florida State game on Saturday, and they're going to be honored on the field at the Florida State game. I hope that people will still turn out for the 0-2 Noles, but that'll be a treat. So we're able to do that. So yes, no, baseball's been a big part of of my life. I thought honestly, like I would have played as long as I could, but I thought maybe I'd end up doing something in like the front office. 9/11 happened. I ended up joining the Navy, served in Iraq, doing all that, and that kind of led me more to a public service. But I could consider doing that. You know, it's interesting. I just came back from Miami, and all the teams in the state, they've got good ownership. I've been friends with a lot of these people. When COVID happened, I was really pushing to have sports. So if you remember, all the sports shut down, like the leagues just stopped, I think mid-March of 2020. And so, 2 weeks later, like we have no live sports. We have, are we just going to do this indefinitely? I'm literally watching like reruns of like the 1983 World Series. It's like, that's not what I want. I want to watch live. So Dana White from UFC, Ultimate Fighting, he was talking about finding a deserted island and doing a UFC fight. So I called him and said, Dana, just do Florida. And he's like, all right. And so he's like, where should I do it? And I'm like, well, you could do it anywhere. I was like, we'll make it happen. We're open. We want to have this. And he's like, I'll only do it in a place, where there's a Republican mayor. And I was like, Dana, I'll overrule the mayor. Don't worry about it. He's like, I know. He's like, I don't want any problems with any of these people. If we do it, I want to be welcome. So we literally went down the list of cities. Tampa, no. Orlando, no. Jacksonville at the time, yes. So we did it in Jacksonville. So this is probably 6-7 weeks into COVID. They did it there. Then we did the golf. Tiger Woods and Mickelson and Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. We did that at Medalist Golf Club. It got like 8 million live TV viewers, which is insane on TNT. But then I was like, we got to have like fans, and we got to get the season going, get Major League Baseball back or whatever. And someone was like, Governor, how could you want people with COVID to be sitting in a Major League Baseball stadium? That could be a super spreader event. And I said, excuse me, if you've ever been to a Miami Marlins game, you should know there's natural social distancing that's taking place because they ain't drawing a lot of attendance. But yes, we want to see baseball promoted as best we can. I mean, I think when I was growing up, it was considered the national pastime. Now, like the last 20 years, I mean, football is the national pastime in this country. It's not even close. Most popular sport by far. Baseball isn't as popular as it used to be. I know they've done some things to try to tinker with it. Some things I like the pitch clock. Some things I think are gimmicky. I don't know if you saw. I didn't realize they changed on the NFL on the kickoffs. Did you see the new kickoff rule?
I think it's weird.
So they move. Because I was like, they're getting all the people are lining up like on the offense's side basically. I think it was like on like the 35-yard line of the other team. The kicker is way back on the other side of the field. I'm like, what the heck is going on? Was there a pregame penalty or something? And then they kick it, and you're not allowed to move forward until the receiver catches the ball. It was really weird, and I think the universal view amongst people was that it was a bad rule change. They should have just left it as it was.
Yeah, bad rule change. I remember the two of us watched a high school football state championship game on the sidelines together at Doak Campbell right at the end of COVID, and I mentioned to you then, and I'm going to say it again now, thanks for how you led during that time through COVID, and thank you.
Well, we were at the College World Series in Omaha, and Florida State made it, and Florida made it, and they both finished in the top 4, but they didn't make it to the top 2 playoff championship series. And I'm looking at there's 8 teams, and basically Texas, Virginia, and Southeast. There was not one team, the North you get with baseball, because it's harder, right, in cold weather. Not one team from California. And I was thinking to myself, and I think, look, they had high school players locked out of sports. They weren't embracing it. And the reality is like you need your at-bats, you need your innings. And I don't think that was, I think the reason why is I think it relates to COVID. I really do. We had people that moved their families to Florida just so their kids could play sports and keep their careers going. Heck, the Michigan's quarterback last year was a first-round pick. Illinois, he was locked out of the season. He moved down to Bradenton and did the IMG. So it really made a difference in a lot of people's lives. Me being an athlete growing up, I just thought to myself, like, okay, if I was in middle school or high school or college and they took away the season, would that be better for me or worse for me? It would have been way worse. I would have been way more likely to get in trouble and do stupid things without having the discipline of being there, working hard on all this. And so we really worked hard. The SEC in 2020, the Pac-12 and the Big Ten said no college football season. This was August of 2020. They said, we're out, COVID, we're out. And first of all, that was so anti-science because these athletes were like the least likely to be impacted by COVID. Many of them had already had it. And so it was really dumb. But nevertheless, they were doing that. And so some of the schools in the SEC, including one that may be in the state of Florida, were wavering on whether they were going to play. And at the time, John Thrasher was at Florida State, and John's like, we're playing, I'm with you. But, and I had to send the message, we are playing. If a player doesn't want to play, we'll pay for their scholarship, that's fine. If they think it's not in their interest or if they think it's not safe to do it, then we're not going to force anyone. We'll keep them on scholarship, that's fine. But we're playing, and so the SEC came out and said, we're playing, and then the ACC followed suit. And then like 2 weeks later, the Big Ten and the Pac, they got shamed into doing it because people were doing it, high schoolers were playing and everything, and so they had to reverse course, and they ended up starting the season late. Same thing with high school. We had in our high school athletic association, we had all these doctors saying the kids were going to die if they played sports, and I'm thinking to myself, I was reading the data, and that just wasn't true. And it really bothered me that the physicians that were advising our high school athletic association were hysterical about this. And we just sent the message like, look, we're playing. If someone doesn't want to play, fine. If someone wants to be held back and have a chance to play, fine. We'll accommodate, but do not take away these opportunities for these kids just because you have an ideological agenda. And so, I'm proud of a lot of the things we've done, but particularly on the sports, no state led the way on sports like we did during COVID.
That's great. As people who believe that Jesus rose from the grave, we want to be a courageous church. We're committed to that. And I just want to say thanks for having our back in that. Thanks for having our back. And we're just grateful. I'd like to pray for you before we send you home. Go be with your family. Is there anything particular that we could pray for you about right now, and in your leadership and in your life?
Well, I always just ask for wisdom. I think that's something that God can help me with. So if you can help facilitate that, that will be much appreciated.
All right, let's pray for our governor. Our Father, we are grateful that you are a God who hears our prayers, that we have your ear. What an amazing thing that is. Lord, we pray for our governor. We pray for his family. And we ask exactly what he requested. We corporately ask you that you give him wisdom to lead us well, to lead his family well, to lead our state well, wisdom for the future, whatever it is you have in store for him. And we ask that be a reality in his life. We look at the scriptures and see a precedent of leaders praying for wisdom, and we ask that wisdom be a reality in his life. Keep him healthy, keep him close to you, allow him to fear you and not this world. And we ask just for more leadership to come from him, and that in people in this room, that we'll be a courageous people, because we really do believe that Jesus rose from the grave. The final victory is in Christ, so we have nothing to fear here on earth. Help us to believe that. We need you and depend on you. And we ask you for all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.